Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha in Volume 3, chapters 91 through 100. This volume is titled Foundation in the Teachings. We've got 10 chapters to study today where we're going to be learning the words of the Buddha. Remember, as you're investigating these teachings, you would like to be able to learn them, examine them, investigate them. You would like to reflect on them to independently verify them, and then start integrating them into your life so that you can start experiencing the results of training the mind. So welcome to all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly. The way that we do this program is we have chapters from our book series that I invite the people in Zoom to be able to read. Once a person has read the individual chapters, then I will actually teach on that particular chapter. And then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have. If you'd like to ask questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. In the comment section, I'll be able to see that. But then you can also raise your hand in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like that way as well, just by unmuting your microphone. So is there someone who would like to read this first chapter? Okay, Yusuf. I'm probably going to pause you at different times, but just so you know that we'll probably kind of take this in sections.
Why every practitioner should study the Tathagata's word. Words should be studied, learned, and investigated in the foremost assembly. Here, in this kind of assembly, when those discourses are being recited that are mere poetry composed by poets, beautiful in words and phrases, created by outsiders, spoken by their disciples, the monks do not want to listen to them, do not lend an ear to them, or apply their minds to understand them. They do not think those teachings should be studied and learned. But when those discourses spoken by the Tathagata are being recited, that are deep in meaning, worded transcending, connected with emptiness, the monks want to listen to them, lend an ear to them, and apply their minds to understand them. They think those teachings should be studied and learned, and having learned those teachings, they question each other about them and investigate them thoroughly, asking, how is this? What is the meaning of this? They disclose to others what is obscure and clarify what is unclear, and dispel their confusion about numerous misunderstandings. This is called the assembly training in investigation, not in conceited thought.
Okay, let's pause right there for a second just so I can help students to understand this one. So here the Buddha is describing how when he shares his teachings, they're very deep in meaning. But there's other people who are sharing teachings that is just mere poetry, kind of beautiful in words and phrases, kind of easy on the ears. And what he's saying is those people who are trained in investigation and investigating the teachings, they're interested in learning and studying the teachings of the Buddha. They're not interested in hearing or even diving into these words that are just mere poetry, because that's not what leads to enlightenment. The teachings of the Buddha are describing the natural laws of existence, and they don't sound like poetry. You need to be able to investigate and examine them, reflect on them to independently verify them and practice them. And he's saying that this community that is trained in investigation, after they've heard the teachings, they start investigating them thoroughly, asking, what is this? How is this? Basically, all these different questions. And this is what helps you to eliminate any confusion or numerous misunderstandings. This is just one discourse among others where you can see that the Buddha teaches that it's important to study the true teachings of the Buddha. There's other discourses where he shares even just to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you would need to be able to actually learn the true teachings of the Buddha. You wouldn't be able to actually get to enlightenment without having those true teachings, and you wouldn't be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment either. So we might think that during the lifetime of the Buddha, he was the only one teaching, but there were other people teaching as well. So there were different people who were listening to those other teachers, and it was just easy on the ears. And we kind of have that today, right? Where people might just start talking about the clouds and the sunshine and the rays of sun and the rainbows and all these different things, but it never explains how to actually eliminate discontentedness. It doesn't even explain what causes discontentedness. It's just kind of easy on the ears to be able to listen to these kinds of things. So in order to understand the teachings of the Buddha, you need to dive in and sink your teeth into the true teachings, and that's the teachings of the Buddha, and then you need to be able to investigate them and examine them. Okay, so if you'd like to keep going, Yusuf, we'll take questions at the end of all these series of discourses here. Go ahead, sir.
Words that should be studied and mastered, simile of the drug bag. Monks, once in the past, the unknown name, had a kettle drum called the summoner. When the summoner became cracked, the SARS inserted another bag. Eventually, the time came when the summoner's original drum head had disappeared and only a collection of bags remained. So too monks. The same thing will happen with the monks in the future when those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, word transcending, dealing with emptiness, are being recited. They will not be eager to listen to them, nor lend an ear to them, nor apply their minds to understand them, and they will not think those teachings should be studied and mastered. But when those discourses are mere poetry composed by poets, beautiful in words and phrases created by outsiders, spoken by the disciples, are being recited, they will be eager to listen to them, will lend an ear to them, will apply their minds to understand them, and they will think those teachings should be studied and mastered. In this way, monks, those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, word transcending, dealing with emptiness, will disappear. Therefore, monks, you should train yourself thus. When those discourses spoken by the Tathagata that are deep in meaning, word transcending, dealing with emptiness, are being recited, we will be eager to listen to them. We will lend an ear to them, will apply our minds to understand them, and we will think those teachings should be studied and mastered. Thus, you should train yourself.
Okay, so let me explain this one. So here the Buddha is giving an analogy of this drum, which is essentially made out of wood. And as the wood is cracking, they're putting wooden pegs into the drum in order to kind of take up that space of the crack. And eventually, time's gone on for so long that there's enough cracks and that there's enough wooden pegs into this drum that the original drum head no longer exists, that it's just these pegs. He's relating that to his teachings, that as less and less people are interested to understand his teachings, particularly the ordained practitioners, that if they're listening to this mere poetry and they're not paying attention to listen with eager ears to his teachings, then the same thing's going to happen, that it's no longer this drum anymore, that with all these wooden pegs in there, it's no longer the original drum, and it doesn't sound beautiful, right? It's going to not sound the same. So it's the same thing that is true with his teachings, that as people aren't studying his original teachings, then they're not getting the true meaning of what they need in order to get to enlightenment. And the Buddha predicted this, and he talks about it in other places too, where there's this decline, this gradual decline of his teachings. And we're in this period right now where ordained practitioners a lot of times aren't even studying the original words of the Buddha, and what they are doing, is up to them. It's their life, it's their choices, but without a really strong ordained community, then the household practitioners don't have the wisdom that they need to be able to then get to enlightenment. So the ordained practitioners listening to the teachings and understanding the true teachings of the Buddha, being very strong in the world, we would see more and more and more people getting to enlightenment, not just ordained practitioners, but household practitioners too. So the Buddha is encouraging you to be able to learn his actual teachings, because here he's predicting how his teachings are going to disappear. And he talks about it in much more detail in other teachings that he shares. So he's encouraging you to listen and train with his teachings, because that's what's actually going to lead to your liberation of mind, to enlightenment, where the mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. So now, Yusuf, if you'd like to read all the rest of these, you can do that. I won't stop you anymore.
Okay. Words from singleness of mind. Agavesina, the Tathagata teaches the teachings to others only to give them knowledge. When the talk is finished, Agavesa, then I steady my mind internally, quieten it, bring it to singleness, and concentrate it on that same sign of concentration as before, in which I constantly reside. Words that are just so, not otherwise. From the night he fully awakened, monks, until the night he attains final nibbana, final enlightenment. In this interval, whatever he speaks, talks of, and expounds, all that is just so, not otherwise. Words of immediately effective teachings. Good, monks. So you have been guided by me with these teachings, which are visible here and now, immediately effective, inviting inception onward, leading to the experience by the wise for themselves. Words of the teachings and discipline, words to be resided with as one's own island, as one's own refuge. Ananda, it may be that you will think the teacher's instruction has ceased. Now we have no teacher. It should not be seen like this, Ananda. For what I have taught and explained to you as the teachings and discipline will, at my passing, be your teacher. Those monks, Ananda, either now or after I am gone, who reside with themselves as their own island, with themselves as their own refuge, with no other refuge, who reside with the teachings as their island, with the teachings as their refuge, with no other refuge. It is these monks, Ananda, who will be for me greatest of those dedicated to the training. Words to be undertook as taught, not to be abolished. As long as the monks do not give instruction on anything that has not been taught, or abolish anything that has already been taught, but undertake and practice the training guidelines as they have been taught, only growth is to be predicted for them, not decline.
Okay, thank you, sir. So continuing from where we left off, where the Buddha is talking about this community trained in investigation, not in conceited talk, and then this situation where his teachings would gradually decline because people aren't actually listening to his original teachings, which is what we see today. Here he talks about that once he's taught and he's shared the teachings, he's focusing his mind and concentrating it. He's doing that as he's speaking as well as he's teaching, but then he's just talking about, okay, after he's actually taught, this is what he actually does. Then this is actually spoken by his students. This wasn't actually spoken by the Buddha. What he's saying here, or what his students are saying here, is that from the moment that he got to enlightenment until the moment that he died, everything that he spoke about was the teachings that lead to enlightenment. He was guiding and helping people to be able to get to enlightenment. And then from there is where he experiences death of the body, where the body has expired, and we refer to that as final enlightenment. For an individual who has attained enlightenment and then experiences the end of this life, we don't call that death, we call it final enlightenment. And if you guys need to understand what final enlightenment is, just ask me and I'll let you know and I'll explain it to you. Then here they're talking about words of immediately effective teachings. This is where the Buddha is essentially saying that if you learn his teachings they're immediately effective, right? If you learn and investigate something like breathing mindfulness meditation and you start practicing it, it's immediately effective. You're not going to instantly get to enlightenment, but you can see how it's starting to work on the mind. Or if you learn about loving kindness and compassion and you start being more loving, kind as well as compassionate, then what you'll notice is that this has an immediate effect and it's beneficial. Or if you learn about singleness of mind and you start practicing concentration, you're not going to have a concentrated mind right away, but if you start honing your mind and start practicing singleness of mind, it's immediately effective, helping you. So the Buddha is saying how his teachings are immediately effective because it's the actual truth. And it's inviting inspection, that you'll never see the Buddha saying that his teaching should be believed. Instead, he's saying, come investigate them, come examine them, come inspect them. That's what he's teaching as part of his teachings. So that's what you're trained to do. And that's what I've been teaching you to do, is to learn them, to reflect on them, and then to practice them so that they can be experienced. By you practicing the teachings, you can experience the results. Then the Buddha is talking here to one of his students. The Buddha is actually getting ready to die when he actually says this. He talks about this about 3 months before his death, where he's talking to a close student, Ananda, who was begging and pleading with him not to die. And the Buddha was essentially sharing with him that, hey, once I die, you might think that the instruction has ended and that there's no more teacher. But he's encouraging his students not to see it that way, but instead use the teachings that he shared over the last 45 years to actually be your teacher. That it's the words that he spoke, that's the teacher. But then you're also going to need a real life teacher. You wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment by yourself. When he talks about be your own island or in your own refuge, what he means here is take responsibility for your growth and development on the path, that you're not dependent on other people. That just like when you learned how to speak English, for example, you didn't have someone hold your hand and walk you through this. You chose to go to classes, you chose to read books, you chose to do your assignments, you chose to do many number of things in order to learn English. And now, because you took the responsibility of your own learning, you are able to speak English. But you had many teachers along the way that have helped you to be able to speak English. So it's the same thing here with the path to enlightenment. You're going to need a teacher to guide you along the path, but you need to take responsibility for your own learning and growth and not put that on somebody else, because nobody else is going to be able to help you to get to enlightenment in terms of forcing you or controlling you to be able to do that. You need to make the choices yourself to be able to get to enlightenment. And then lastly, here he's saying any instruction that he's given, that it would be wise to not abolish that, to not change anything that he taught. So don't abolish anything that he's taught. And also, don't give instruction on anything that he has not taught. And if this is the case, if people do that, then only growth will be predicted, not decline, meaning that your life's only going to get better. The condition of your mind is only going to get better. But once you start changing and modifying the teachings of the Buddha, this is where it's really for your harm and for the harm of many people. The Buddha has other discourses where he talks about it in that way. So what he's guiding people to do after him is to not give instruction on anything that he has not taught, and don't eliminate anything that he has taught. In that way, then as people learn and train with these training guidelines, then there'll only be growth and development in the mind and growth and development in your life, moving closer and closer to this enlightened mental state. So let me know if you guys have any questions on any of these discourses here. It's quite a few all at once in this one chapter. It's all helping you to understand why it's important for every practitioner to study the original words of the Buddha. And there's other discourses along these same topics as well. This isn't all of them, but this is a good collection of discourses to be able to see why it's so important to study the original words of the Buddha. So you can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I see Yusuf, you have your hand up. Go ahead, sir.
The Buddha mentioned that a dedicated practitioners would discuss the teachings between themselves, and a friend told me that you did advise the same advice. So my question is why, or what is the benefit of discussing the teachings with another student instead of discussing it with the wiser man, which is the teacher?
Yeah, what happens is that, a teacher can only talk so much with their students because they're going to have thousands and thousands of students. The teacher's not going to be able to talk to every single student. So if the students are talking with each other, what this does is it brings the teachings up into your mind. Of course, there's a lot more benefit in discussing the teachings with the teacher, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about them amongst yourselves. And it's not that you're teaching each other, it's just that you're discussing them. And then what this does is it helps to bring the teachings up into the mind, and it helps to be able to then remember them, internalize them, and practice them. So for example, one of the things that I've been doing with students is the students will talk to me about the Eightfold Path, and they will pretend like they're describing the Eightfold Path to me. And you did this once, Yusuf, as well. And you guys could actually be doing this with each other. It's like a study group, right? Where like maybe one person is talking about the Eightfold Path and describing it, while another student or two or three can be looking at the discourses of the Buddha and can be confirming for that student whether or not they're understanding the teachings accurately or not based on the original words. So studying together in a study group can actually be really helpful to bring the teachings up into the mind and make them more and more part of the conscious mind, so that then you can actually practice the teachings, because that's where the real results come in.
Okay, so the other question is about emptiness, the thing that I'm really curious to ask you about, because before I studied with you, I faced emptiness and studied it on my own, and I thought that emptiness means that the life has no meaning. That's why I maybe was lying in bed for weeks doing nothing, because I thought it mean that the life has no meaning. So I am really curious to know, what does emptiness mean? It relates to the Heart Sutra, if you know that.
Yeah, this isn't part of the teachings of the Buddha. The Heart Sutra is part of another tradition of Buddhist teachings, and it's not really confirmed that the Buddha actually taught that or not. What the Buddha is talking about here when he's talking about dealing with emptiness is that if you learn and practice his teachings, it will help you to train your mind and get to a point where the mind is empty of any pollutions of mind. That's what it's going to actually lead to, which is this natural mind where it's bright and radiant and cheerful, where if your mind is filled up with a bunch of pollution, you're not going to be able to experience that. But if you get to the point where you eradicate these pollutions, we might refer to this as emptiness.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me check. Oh, okay, it looks like Roxanne has some questions. Go ahead, ma'am.
Oh, I was offering to read next.
Oh, okay, perfect. Looks like we don't have any other questions, so here you go, chapter 92.
The Noble Eightfold Path is the wholesome practice instituted. Ananda. I instituted that wholesome practice which leads to complete liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. And what is that wholesome practice? It is the Noble Eightfold Path. That is, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Nanda, I say to you, continue this wholesome practice instituted by me, and do not be the last man. Ananda, where there are two men living, he under whom there occurs a breach of his wholesome practice, he is the last man among them. Therefore, Ananda, I say to you, continue this wholesome practice instituted by me, and do not be the last man.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So as you guys have all learned, the Eightfold Path is that core central teaching of the Buddha that everything else plugs into. In terms of the path to enlightenment, it's the Eightfold Path that is the path to enlightenment. In terms of the first book that I titled Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, this is the life practice, the Eightfold Path. In order to get to enlightenment, someone would need to know that inside and out, backwards and forwards, left, right, up, down. You're going to need to revisit it multiple times and dial it in closer and closer to your day-to-day day-to-day life in order to experience the real results. And this is just one place where the Buddha is talking about that and making sure students know, like, hey, this is the wholesome practice. This is the life practice. If you're interested in, even remotely interested in getting to enlightenment, this is the path that you need to be able to learn, and you need to be able to commit it to memory so that you can practice on a day-to-day basis. And the Buddha here, talking to his student Ananda, he's saying, okay, essentially, as all these beings are learning and practicing the teachings, and more beings are getting to enlightenment, and beings aren't being reborn, he's saying, okay, eventually, if there's just two people that are left in the world, and there's one person who ends up not practicing the teachings, then that's the last person that to get to enlightenment. And he's saying, okay, don't be the last person. That would be very horrible if you were like the very, very, very last person in the world to get to enlightenment. I just can't imagine what that would have been like, to be able to be reborn all those times and just having all that misery. And now everybody's gone, and there you are, still having not got to enlightenment. Right? So the Buddha is essentially saying, don't be complacent. Focus on the Eightfold Path. That's what's going to lead to your enlightenment. So let me know if you guys have questions on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. All right, so let's move to chapter 93. We're moving into the story of the Buddha's last days, where we're going to start studying some chapters where the Buddha is nearing death. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. The Buddha's last days. Sariputta, there are certain ascetics and Brahmins whose doctrine and view is this. As long as this good man is still young, a black-haired young man, endowed with youthfulness, in the prime of life, so long as is he perfect in his clear wisdom. But when this good man is old, aged, burdened with years, advanced in life, and come to the last stage, being 80, 90, or 100 years old, then the clarity of wisdom is lost. But it should not be regarded so. I am now old, aged, burdened with years, advanced in life, and come to the last stage. My years have turned 80. Now suppose that I had 4 disciples with 100 years lifespan, perfect in mindfulness, recall of the teachings, memory, and clarity of wisdom. Just as a skilled archer, trained, practiced, and tested, could easily shoot a light arrow across the shadow of a palm tree. Suppose that they were even to the extent perfect in mindfulness, recall of the teachings, memory, and clarity of wisdom. Suppose that they continuously asked me about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and that I answered them and then asked them that they remembered each answer of mine, and never asked a subsidiary question or paused except to eat, drink, consume food, taste, urinate, defecate, and rest in order to remove sleepiness and tiredness. Still, the Tathagata's explanation of the teachings, his explanation of factors of the teachings, and his replies to questions would not yet come to an end. But meanwhile, those 4 disciples of mine with the 100-year lifespan would have died at the end of those 100 years. Sariputta, even if you have to carry me about on a bed, still there will be no change in the clarity of the Tathagata's wisdom. Rightly speaking, were it to be said of anyone, a being not subject to ignorance delusion has appeared in the world of the welfare and peacefulness of many, out of compassion for the world, for the good welfare and peacefulness of gods and humans. It is of me indeed that rightly speaking this should be said. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the perfectly enlightened one. Having approached and paid homage, respect while massaging the perfectly enlightened one's limbs, he said to him, "It is wonderful, Venerable Sir. It is amazing, Venerable Sir." The perfectly enlightened one's complexion is no longer pure and bright. His limbs are all flimsy and wrinkled. His body is stooped, and some alteration is seen in his sense bases, in the eye sense base, the ear sense base, the nose sense base, the tongue sense base, and the body sense base. So it is, Ananda. In youth, one is subject to aging. In health, one is subject to sickness, and while alive, one is subject to death. The complexion is no longer pure and bright. The limbs are all flimsy and wrinkled. The body is stooped, and some alteration is seen in the sense bases. In the eye sense base, the ear sense base, the nose sense base, the tongue sense base, and the body sense base. This is what the perfectly enlightened one said. Having said this, the fortunate one, the teacher, further said this. Yuck on you, pitiful aging, aging which makes beauty fade. So much has the charming puppet been crushed beneath advancing age. One who might live 100 years also has death as destination. Death appears not along the way, but comes crushing everything. And now again, Ananda, the Tathagata has today at Chapala's shrine consciously and deliberately rejected the rest of his allotted term of life. And when he had thus spoken, the Venerable Ananda addressed the Fortunate One and said, "Grant us the privilege, Venerable Sir, to remain during the eon, to live on through the eon. O Fortunate One, for the good and the peacefulness of the great multitudes, many people, out of pity for the world, for the wholesome and the gain and well-being of gods and men. Enough now, Ananda. Beg not the Tathagata," was the reply. "The time for making such a request has passed." And again the second time and the third time, the Venerable Ananda begged the Fortunate One in the same words. And he received from the Fortunate One the same reply. In that when a suggestion so evident and a hint so clear were thus given to you by the Tathagata, you would be incapable of comprehending them. If you should have then so begged the Tathagata might have rejected an appeal even to the second time, but the third time he would have granted it. You therefore, O Ananda, are the fault, you are the offense. But now, Ananda, have I not formally declared to you that it is in the very nature of all things, near and dear unto us, that we must divide ourselves from them, leave them, sever ourselves from them? How then, Ananda, can this be possible? Whereas anything whatever born, brought into being, and organized, contains within itself the inherent necessity of dissolution. How can then this be possible, that such a being should not be dissolved? No such condition can exist. All conditioned things must grow old. Work out his salvation with diligence. The final extension of the Tathagata will take place before long. At the end of 3 months from this time, the Tathagata will die. My age is now full ripe. My life draws to its close. I leave you, I depart, relying on myself alone. Be diligent then, O brethren, holy, full of thought. Be steadfast in dedication. Keep watch over your own hearts. Who becomes tired not, but holds fast to this truth and natural law, shall cross in this sea of life, shall make an end of grief. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So going all the way back here to the beginning, what the Buddha is talking about is, okay, when somebody is young, and it's pretty common that you might have a certain level of clear wisdom or a clear mind. And then as one ages, it's pretty accepted throughout society that as someone ages, their mind deteriorates. But the Buddha is saying that that's not the case for him, that even though his eyes, ears, nose, the tongue, the body, sense bases have deteriorated, his mind hasn't. He still has this clear wisdom that is able to function just like he did prior. So at the age of 80 is when he died, but his mind was just as sharp as it was when it was 35 or 40, that he had trained his mind and uprooted the pollution, so therefore his mind continued to be bright and vibrant and clear. Where oftentimes we associate aging and old age with a declining mind, but that doesn't have to be the case. That is the case for someone who hasn't trained their mind. You're going to see as they age, their mind is going to decline. But for somebody who's trained their mind and uprooted their pollutions, their mind is performing optimally. So even though they're aging, they're not going to experience that decline of the mind. So that's one of the benefits and one of the motivating factors to be able to train your mind and get to enlightenment, so that as you age, you don't see this decline in the condition of the mind. So the Buddha is talking about that all the way through here, where his student Ananda eventually gets to the point where he's kind of begging and pleading with him not to die. And the Buddha says, of course I need to die because everything is impermanent, essentially, is what the Buddha said, that even he himself is impermanent. And then he kind of starts giving some words to his students to help them understand before he dies some teachings, because he wisely let people know 3 months before his death that he was actually going to die. This is how enlightened he was, that he knew 3 months ahead of time, because there would have been students that were really close to him that had gotten to enlightenment, and they weren't attached to him, and they were maybe out there sharing the teachings with other people. But then there would have been people kind of on the outer edges who weren't really learning the teachings very closely, and they might have been attached to him. So by giving them a 3 months heads up that he was going to die, this gives them opportunity to ask questions and understand anything they need to understand before he dies, but also it helps them to gradually let go of any potential attachment that they have. This particular student, Ananda, was with the Buddha for an extensive amount of time, pretty much his entire teaching career, for the entire 45 years. And by the way that it reads here, it appears that Ananda was attached to him, because he never actually got to enlightenment during the lifetime of the Buddha, but shortly after, about 3 months or so, he ends up getting to enlightenment. And sometimes that's what needs to occur in order for you to eliminate attachment to an actual person, is for them to die. If you think about it, when your mom was maybe alive, you had a lot of attachment to her. But now that she's been dead for maybe a period of time, your mind has let go. And this is sometimes what needs to happen in order for someone to let go. But you can actually eliminate attachment while someone's alive. You just need to know how to actually do it, and that would be ideal. But it looks like Ananda didn't have that wisdom, so he didn't let go of his attachment to the Buddha until it was after his death. So the Buddha is sharing here towards the end, he's saying, okay, look after your own hearts. Whenever he talks about the heart, he's actually talking about the mind, because the way that they thought about the mind is they thought about it as being inside the heart. So he's saying essentially, keep watch over your own mind, right? Who becomes tired not, so he who doesn't become tired, or she who doesn't become tired, but holds fast to this truth in these natural laws that you've been learning, shall cross the sea of life, meaning you will get to enlightenment, shall make an end of grief or discontentedness or stress or anxiety or suffering. All of this will be eliminated if you don't allow the mind to become complacent. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. It's a pretty long chapter, at least from what we typically read, but very detailed and helping you to see certain aspects of the life of the Buddha. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter. This is chapter 94. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, we've got a couple of hands up. Vipava, I think your hand was up from before. Is that from before?
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question? Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, so I had asked this question before, but it is clear in this particular chapter that it seems that Ananda had a like option to kind of ask Buddha of staying for an eon, but it seems like Ananda did not take that. He didn't understand that the Tathagata had offered him that choice, and he did not take it when he had the choice, and now he's asking much later. Is that what happened?
Yeah, it looks like that's what happened, but it's impossible for anyone to live for an entire eon, because the way that the Buddha describes an eon is it's an immeasurable amount of time. They could count up to essentially 100,000 during their lifetime. They didn't have the word for million, so an eon would be beyond a million because they couldn't count beyond that. So they just looked at it as an unimmeasurable amount of time. So it would be impossible for anybody to live that length of time. But the Buddha was essentially making it known that, yeah, this is impossible and he's not going to be able to live that long.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it looks like Marcy had volunteered to read this one. If you'd like to go ahead, Marcy.
Thank you, teacher. Reside with the teachings as your refuge. But have I not already declared, Ananda, that we must be parted, separated, and severed from all who are dear and agreeable to us? How, Ananda, is it to be obtained here? May what is born come to be, conditioned and subject to disintegration, not disintegrate. That is impossible. Therefore, Ananda, reside with yourself as your own island, with yourself as your own refuge, with no other refuge. Reside with the teachings as your island, with the teachings as your refuge, with no other refuge. And how, Ananda, does monk reside with himself as his own island, with himself as his own refuge, with no other refuge, with the teachings as his island, with the teachings as his refuge, with no other refuge. Here, Ananda, a monk resides reflecting on the body as body. He resides reflecting on feelings as feelings. He resides reflecting on mind as mind. He resides reflecting on mental objects as mental objects. Dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having moving craving and displeasure in regard to the world. Those monks, Amanda, either now or after I am gone, who reside with themselves as their own island, with themselves as their own refuge, with no other refuge, who reside with the teachings as their island, with the teachings as their refuge, with no other refuge. It is these monks, Ananda, who will be for me greatest of those dedicated to the training.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here the Buddha is describing to use the teachings as your refuge. What a refuge is protection. What he's teaching you is how to protect the mind, so that no matter what you see, hear, smell, taste, anything that comes in contact with the body or anything goes through the mind, your mind is fully protected, that you're not going to experience the discontentedness. And he's explaining that to Ananda, this is a continuation of the previous discourse, that, hey, I've got to die, essentially. That whatever was born and come to be, it's conditioned, it's going to disintegrate. It's not possible for me to live forever. But while I'm gone and while I'm dying, make sure that you reside with yourself as your own island, your own refuge, your own protection. And the way that you do that is through understanding and practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness. There's many teachings that you're going to need to learn to develop and get to enlightenment, but it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness that once you dial that in among all the other teachings, because you're going to need the other ones in order to get this one dialed in, this is where things really start to change for you. If you can cut off and let go of any discontentedness as a rising bodily sensation, and you can cut it off there every single time, you're really close to enlightenment. You're about 1 to 3 years away from enlightenment. And that's actually really close, because if you think about countless rebirths of just being reborn over and 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 over again, 1 to 3 years is a very short period of time. So if you can develop the 4 foundations of mindfulness and paying attention to that early warning system of the bodily sensations that are cluing you in that discontentedness is about to arise, and cut it off and let it go there, this would be ideal. If you can't cut it off there, you can cut it off as a feeling, you can cut it off as the condition of the mind, and more you're going to need to pay attention to the mental objects. Those mental objects are the 10 fetters. Those symptoms of the mental objects are things like personal existence view, doubts, wrong behavior and observances, central desire, ill will, desire for form, desire for formless, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. You need to be able to be aware of what the symptoms of those are, how to eliminate them, and how to know that you've actually eliminated them. That's what it means to have awareness of the mental objects. Because if you're getting more and more handle of these things, then you'll be able to see that you can transform the mind. Where early on in practice, you would like to pay attention to the Eightfold Path really, really closely. You'd like to develop that. You'd like to memorize it. You'd like to dial it in closer and closer in your day-to-day life. And having practiced that for an extended period of time, several months, you're going to notice that the mind's going to start experiencing the jhanas. This is like the light bulb flickering and starting to help you see that these heightened qualities of awareness are starting to come into the mind. And when you start seeing that, you pivot and you start focusing on the fetters. So the programs that I've developed all laid out in such a way that it's going to guide you along this path. There's the foundation and the path to enlightenment, which is helping you to be able to get layered with a foundation and kind of a framework. Then there's the harmony in relationships. There's experiencing the jhanas and the 4 stages of enlightenment. Then there's the retreat that I teach each January, which is everything you need to attain the 1st stage of enlightenment. And then in August, there's the retreat to help you learn the fetters really in detail. It's called Purification of the Mind to Attain Enlightenment. These 5 learning events, along with the group learning program and the Pali Canon and English study group and all the personal guidance, this is what you need in order to be able to gradually make your way to enlightenment with the books and the videos and the podcasts and things like that. But it's focusing on those 4 foundations of mindfulness that are really going to help you to transform the mind, because at this point, you're not relying on anybody whatsoever. You can see your own qualities of mind. You can see those defilements arising, those pollutions, those taints. You can see anytime discontentedness is starting to arise, and you can cut it off and let it go. And that's what you would like to ultimately be able to get to, so that you can transform the mind and experience the peace and the joy of the enlightened mind. So it looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. So I have noticed that the mind, because it had existed in the darkness for so long, when it was experiencing this peacefulness, it would struggle with letting go of the pleasant feelings. And that is something that I have been working on. I have been able to notice the sensations of the body, but it comes down to where I get this internal, let's say, discussion about, well, I really, really, really like this feeling, and I really, really think it's okay if I just experience this for this one last time, and then the next time it happens, then maybe I'll cut it off because I know how to cut it off. So that's where the mind is right now. And I'm just wondering, teacher, if there was something that you could, some kind of guidance you may be able to provide me to try to minimize that internal dialogue, so that I am more readily to, or willing to, or the mind's more willing to just cut off the pleasant feelings.
Yeah, this is the mind trying to justify its conduct and trying to justify indulging in those pleasant feelings. And you need to remind yourself, every time you indulge in those conditioned pleasant feelings, you're just delaying your enlightenment. And that means that if you indulge in those conditioned pleasant feelings, that the painful ones are waiting for you right around the corner. So each time you get that temporary pleasure, you're going to go through some amount of pain as a result. And you need to be able to see that correlation, because then you become less and less interested in indulging in this temporary pleasure, because that temporary pleasure might last minutes or even a few hours, but this painful feeling tends to last a lot longer. And as long as you keep indulging in those conditioned pleasant feelings, the painful ones are waiting there for you. So don't listen to the justification of the mind. Be able to see with wisdom that you need to be able to let go of this temporary happiness in order to get to the permanent happiness. And you're just delaying that opportunity if you keep allowing the mind to be able to make those kinds of decisions and keep indulging in the pleasant feelings.
Thank you, Teacher David. That was very clear.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, let me see what else we have here. All right, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So we've got this next chapter, chapter 95. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Samantha, go ahead, ma'am.
4 criteria that assure the words of the Buddha. Suppose a monk were to say, "Friends, I heard and received this from the perfectly enlightened one's own lips. These are the teachings. This is the discipline. This is the master's teaching. Then, monks, you should neither approve nor disapprove his words. Then, without approving or disapproving, his words and expressions should be carefully noted and compared with the suttas, and reviewed in the light of the discipline. If they, on such comparison and review, are found not to conform to the suttas or the discipline, the conclusion must be, assuredly this is not the word of the Buddha. It has been wrongly understood by this monk, and the matter is to be ignored. But where on such comparison and review they are found to conform to the suttas or the discipline, the conclusion must be, assuredly this is the word of the Buddha. It has been rightly understood by this monk. Suppose a monk were to say, in such and such place there is a community with elders and distinguished teachers. I have heard and received this from that community. Then, monks, you should neither approve nor disapprove his words. Suppose a monk were to say, in such and such a place there are many elders who are learned, bearers of the tradition, who know the teachings, the discipline, the training guidance. Suppose a monk were to say, in such and such a place, there is one elder who is learned. I have heard and received this from that elder. But where on such comparison and review they are found to conform to the suttas and the discipline, then the conclusion must be, assuredly, this is the word of the Buddha. It has been rightly understood by this monk.
Thank you, Samantha. So here, the Buddha is teaching you to not just go by hearsay. Don't just assume that because somebody's telling you that this is something that the Buddha taught, that you just believe it. You need to be able to go back to the original words of the Buddha to be able to see this. And that's how you can confirm whether it's actually a teaching of the Buddha or not. So you will be out and about. You might listen to YouTube videos or podcasts, or you might read a book, or you might hear somebody talking about something. You might see Facebook memes that come across your news feed, and you can research them because you have access to the original words of the Buddha to determine whether or not it's actually his teachings or not. The more you get skilled in understanding his teachings, you'll know right from the beginning whether or not it's his teachings or not. But in the meantime, you might need to do some investigation to be able to see that, because that's the only way that you can confirm of what did the Buddha actually teach, so that then you can investigate that, examine that, you can reflect on it to independently verify it, and you can practice it. If you waste your time with things that the Buddha never actually taught, this is just going to delay your enlightenment. So you'd like to get more and more honed in on exactly what the Buddha taught using the suttas or the discourses. And now you guys have access to all 13 of these books, and there's plenty of other discourses that are out there too that someday you might need to use some other resources, but you have these books that you can use to research these, and that way you can be assured of what are the teachings of the Buddha. And the Buddha is giving you this guidance to essentially compare it to the original discourses. So let me know what questions you guys have here by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or raising your hand in Zoom. Okay, looks like Roxanne either has a question or is volunteering to read.
No, I have a question.
Okay.
When you see outside of your book series, when you see a reference to one of the suttas, is there someplace that we can go to that has all the numbered and lettered pieces in some kind of order that you can look them up at?
Yeah, the best way to do this is you can just go to Google and put in like MN 2 or AN 3.54. And then sometimes you need to put Buddhism at the end of it because it might be a part number in some manufacturing plant somewhere. And that comes up instead, right? But if you put Buddhism at the end of it, it'll pop up. And now that will show you all the different sources across the internet. And if you can't find it that way, there's a place called Sutta Central that has them all listed and indexed, and you can actually click through there and you can navigate into it that way. But I suggest you just do a Google search, because then you can see all the different sources. And as you're out there reading different sources, you need to keep in mind that people are going to be using words that I don't necessarily use. Like they're going to be using suffering. You might see people refer to the Buddha of having said like, you fool, or you stupid fool, which you guys know a Buddha doesn't talk like that. This is the unfortunate part about a unenlightened being that is translating a fully perfectly enlightened words. They're actually using words that they would use in order to refer to somebody, but this isn't what the actual Buddha would use. And then you'll see sometimes different words, like instead of like mental object, you might see people use mental fabrication or different things like this. So if you ever get confused when you're looking at other sources, you can always send me the resource and the source, and I will be able to look at it for you and help you to understand it. But of course, you can do some of that work on your own, but where you need help, you're always welcome to reach out and I'll help you. But I suggest you go to Google first, and then if you can't find different sources there, then you can always go to Sutta Central.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, Vibhav, you have a question, sir? You just need to...
Yeah, just as a follow-up to what you were saying, and I think we've talked about this before as well. Sutta Central seems to be the most is the best collection of the suttas and their translation, but it seems to be that there is also a lot of some of the discourses are not transcribed really well, or they have actually said some of the words are not clearly or not clearly expounded or used. So for a person who does not have access to your books, which seem to be the clearest from just my reading of the original words of the Buddha, they are following something that is not that clear, and they would understand. They would think that that's what the Buddha said, even though it's still not very. It's not closest to what he said. So how do those people understand, or like how will they and people know that this is still not the clearest explanation of the teachings?
Yeah, the average person isn't going to understand that what they're reading is the accurate teachings, because when they go to a source and it's considered to be a translation of the Pali Canon, and they see that somebody has translated that the Buddha says, you stupid fool, da 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 da. And somebody's reading that and they think that's the way a Buddha speaks, so that's the way they speak. And this is the challenge of people out there that are studying without a teacher, without the guidance of a teacher. You have people out there that are studying with no understanding of what enlightenment is at all. They're just kind of dabbling, they're just kind of in the dark. And that's why a teacher is the one who's holding the light and showing you the path, where a student is in the dark. So those people, they're not going to know until they get to a point where they decide that they're going to reach out and find a teacher. But unfortunately, the ego is up so high with a lot of people that they never actually take the time to understand that they need to find a teacher and be able to understand what enlightenment is, and that they need a guide and somebody to help them along the way. So those people are just going to keep struggling until they get to a point where they finally decide that they are going to find a teacher and they get better and more clear translations. And that's why a community like us, we're out there putting out advertisements and inviting people to come and learn. And then if people choose to do that, then great. And if they don't, then that's okay too. That's their decision. They're just going to continue struggles and difficulties of not learning with the original words of the Buddha.
And sorry, one follow-up question on that. This is even true for the ordained practitioners, right? Because they are all also following the same almost. I'm not sure like how many people. I have no clue like how many people are actually enlightened and how many of them are actually teaching. And if there are very few of them, so then most of the instruction that is being given in the ordained practitioner community, and the teachers who are teaching it are not really following the original words or not clearly explaining the original words.
Yeah, to explain how significant this problem is I'll just give you some numbers. There's 500 million people in the world that consider themselves to be on the path and be Buddhist. Out of that 500 million people, there's less than 1% of those people are actually learning with the original words of the Buddha. Because I've visited over 200 temples and I've only ever been to one that actually shares the original words of the Buddha. So that's less than 1%. So if we take that 500 million and we go less than 1%, okay, now out of whatever that number is, now you can understand that a large majority of those people are studying with all these different disparate sources, which are not necessarily translating the words the most clear. So you've got a very small number of people in the world that are studying with really accurate words, not only household practitioners, but ordained practitioners too. And this is the reason why it's so important for ordained practitioners to be able to stand up and start learning more and more, because if we get more and more ordained practitioners that are learning, and I'm not saying that that's our responsibility, we're not required to do that, that's not something we can do, but when I say we, I mean humanity. If humanity gets to the point where we have more and more ordained practitioners learning the original words of the Buddha, my goodness, we can have communities all over the world that are studying with the original words of the Buddha, receiving guidance of how to get to enlightenment, and we can really see some significant improvement in the number of enlightened beings that we see in the world. But with an ordained community who's not studying the original words of the Buddha, there's all these resources going in to sustain their life, and the dhamma isn't being generated to bring the wisdom back to the household practitioners, or the wisdom even being shared among other ordained practitioners. So this is what the world is facing right now, and what our community is doing is focusing on inviting people in, and as people come in, to learn the original words of the Buddha, and then the people can see for themselves. But even in that, sometimes people struggle. People come in and they have all kinds of difficulties within their own mind, and they really struggle even just to learn the original words of the Buddha as well. So even having found the original words of the Buddha, there's some people that really struggle in that regard. So all we can do is just continue to focus on your own growth, your own development, and then where people are interested to join us, okay, great, and we'll continue to go forward and just keep focusing on your own enlightenment. And someday, should more and more people start learning these teachings, wonderful, and they'll be able to use the really clear teachings and the really clear translations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, looks like Marcy, you have a question, or maybe you're volunteering to read.
I was volunteering to read, teacher.
Okay, let me just check one more time, see if we have any other questions. No, we don't have anything. So yeah, let's go to this next chapter, chapter 96.
The supreme honor and respect. Ananda, prepare me a bed between these twin solid trees, with my head to the north. I am sleepy and would like to lie down. Ananda, these sal trees have burst forth into an abundance of untimely blossoms, which fell upon the Tathagata's body, sprinkling it and covering it in homage, respect. Divine coral tree flowers fell from the sky. Divine sandalwood powder fell from the sky, sprinkling and covering the Tathagata's body in homage of respect. Divine music and song sound from the sky in homage and respect to the Tathagata. Never before has the Tathagata been so honored, respected, appreciated, admired, and adored. And yet, Ananda, whatever male or female ordained practitioner, male or female household practitioner resides practicing the teachings properly and perfectly fulfills the way of the teachings, he or she honors the Tathagata as deep respect and appreciates him and pays him the supreme homage, respect. Therefore, Ananda, we will reside practicing the teachings properly and perfectly fulfill the way of the teachings. This must be your goal and objective.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here, essentially what the Buddha is describing is this miracle that was performed. He didn't perform it, but this happened in his presence, and one of his students were there, Ananda, right? So the Buddha isn't all conceited about this. It's not like, wow, look at me, I'm so great, blah, 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 right? He doesn't do that. He uses it as a teaching. He uses it to teach Ananda something, that he says, okay, all of this respect and admiration that's given to me through this miracle, if somebody would really like to respect me, they would learn and practice the teachings. That's the way to actually honor and respect me as a teacher, is to learn and practice the teachings, right? He doesn't get all, caught up in the miracle itself. He focuses on helping this individual Ananda to understand what's important in order to progress forward in life. So here, the Buddha is using this miracle as a way to help people to see that if you really truly would like to respect him or any teacher, it would be to learn and practice their teachings. Even like an English teacher, or if you were learning to be an electrician, right? And this teacher is spending a lot of time with you, one of the best ways to respect that person is deeply study with them and actually practice the teachings that they share. Well, in addition to that, I'd like to share something else with you guys here, that sometimes people think that a ordained practitioner is the only one that can actually get to enlightenment, that a household practitioner can't get to enlightenment. You can actually see it right here in the way that the Buddha is teaching, that both ordained and household practitioners can both get to enlightenment. Because here he's saying whatever male and female ordained practitioner, whatever male and female household practitioner resides practicing the teachings properly and perfectly. So if a household practitioner is practicing the teachings perfectly, that means they're actually enlightened. An enlightened being is a perfect individual. They've evolved to becoming a perfect human being. So here you can see it very clearly that the Buddha is pointing to the fact that household practitioners can practice his teachings perfectly. And this is how you know that a household practitioner can indeed get to enlightenment. And we have household practitioners in the world today that are actually enlightened. So there's no reason why you can't get to enlightenment from the household life if that's what you choose. But you're going to see some people in the world that claim that only ordained practitioners can get to enlightenment. Well, if that was the case, who would actually run the world if everybody was enlightened? Because people know the ultimate goal is for the entire world to become enlightened. Well, if everybody was ordained, who would actually run the world? We wouldn't have taxi drivers. We wouldn't have food servers or nurses or doctors or fire people, the firefighters to put out fire and stuff like this. So, this is where you can see something like that in the teachings of the Buddha. So here he's saying, okay, if you practice the teachings fully, and that's the way to honor him and respect him and show appreciation to him. Okay, looks like Marcy might have a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. So currently here in the United States, we are coming upon an election, and I have taken the time to evaluate the candidates. And one of the ways I did that, and this may or may not be wise, so this is why I bring it up, is I compared the candidates' platforms, I guess you would say, or the tickets that they run on, or their causes, against what the Noble Eightfold Path and what the Buddha would. And it appears that there is a candidate that does have some characteristics of the Buddha's teachings. Would it be a wise way for me to vote in that manner, or should I just withhold my vote because they are not completely practicing, if I'm making myself clear?
Yeah, I understand. What you're doing is wise, but I wouldn't just compare their ticket, like what they say on a website or what their published materials say. I would look at the candidate themselves. That just like I teach you guys how you can determine whether someone's trained their mind for a potential teacher, that you would look for clarity, concentration, deep memory. You're looking for someone whose mind isn't muddled. This is what you would like to look for in a potential candidate. You would like to look for someone who has good wisdom, that is wise and is speaking well. You would like to look at somebody who has wholesome moral conduct and mental discipline, because if someone has muddle-mindedness, then you can tell that their mind's very polluted. That means that not understanding the natural laws of existence and any decisions that they're making in whatever role they're performing as an elected official, this means that they're going to be making unwise decisions because they don't understand the natural laws, because they're not practicing themselves. So I would encourage you to look at the condition of the person's mind without being judgmental, without looking down on them, but instead looking at the condition of their mind rather than just what's been published about this person, because anybody could have someone in the back office kind of preparing documents and putting those on a website, but you would like to look at the candidate themselves when they're actually talking publicly, when they're making public appearances, not only the things that I've talked about already, but look for loving kindness and compassion, sympathetic joy, look for equanimity, that calmness and composure in the mind, because this is somebody who's going to have a better trained mind.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that one of the candidates I was recognizing, but again, I was battling that, not trying to be judgmental, but I saw an abundance amount of like craving and a lot of self-preservation, if that makes sense. Like a lot of like their actions were more about preserving their own image, I guess is what I would probably say, but I was having a hard time with not holding judgment. But that was very clear. Thank you, teacher. I appreciate that.
Yeah, let's talk about judgment and discernment for a moment. Judgment is where you're measuring and comparing somebody. You're looking down on somebody. You're trying to determine what is wholesome and unwholesome for other people. what discernment is where you can look at something and then you can make a wise decision. So if you're looking at two candidates and you come to a certain decision, you're not judging them. You're not saying, oh, this person is bad because of this, and they're really wrong because of this, and they're unwholesome because of that. And now you're out there slandering and gossiping about them and looking down on them. Instead, you're like, let me look at this. Let's take it this way. Let's look at these two trees. Which tree is the most healthy? Which one, if we needed to uproot it and move it to my yard, which one would I like to move? Okay, this tree over here looks like the leaves are brighter, the bark is in better condition, has a better root system. Okay, let me bring this tree over here. And it's not to say that this other tree is bad or that you're looking down on it. It's just like, hey, this is a better specimen, and let me bring this into my yard, right? Where this tree over here, you're just looking at it through discernment, through wise decision making. You're not looking down on it. You're not degrading it and disparaging it. You're just making a wise decision about this tree over here.
Thank you, teacher. That was very clear.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, Vibhav, you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I had a similar question to Marcy. I was wondering if you're not able to vote without detachment, should you even be voting? I'm not saying I'm not trying to be rhetorical or anything. I'm just thinking out loud, because then you're trying to you're doing it out of some craving that you want certain person to be the leader of the country or whatever, right?
So remember, oh, sorry, I thought you were done. You have those long,
Yeah,
you have those long
I can have a follow-up
pauses.
question.
You have those long pauses between the way you speak. I see it on the
Please go
podcast.
ahead. Yeah, that was the first question. Yes.
Okay, so remember, there's two ways to eliminate a craving. You can cut it off and let it go, eliminating it from the mind, but you can also fulfill it too. That's another way to actually eliminate a certain craving. So just because the mind's craving doesn't mean you shouldn't do this particular thing. There's the potential, like you've heard me give the example of like someone who always wanted to go to the Philippines. One of the ways to eliminate that is, yes, cut it off and let it go, but you can also just go to the Philippines too. But you need to do that with as much collected thought as possible as you make your way to the Philippines. So it's the same thing with voting. It doesn't mean just because there's craving or an attachment that one should, just not do it. You could approach it that way, but that's for each individual person to decide. I wouldn't say that everybody should do it that way, because there's two different ways to eliminate a craving. You can distance yourself from it. That would be to not vote, but you could also vote and then choose to extinguish your craving that way as well. And each person has to decide for themselves in which category would they like to practice.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me check, see if we have any other questions anywhere. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so let's go to the next one, chapter 97. So we got a couple hands that have risen here. Marcy, is that a question or reading? Okay, yeah, we'll let Pat go ahead. Go ahead, sir.
Teachings and discipline will be your teacher. Ananda, it may be that you will think the teacher's instruction has ceased. Now we have no teacher. It should not be seen like this, Ananda, for what I have taught and explained to you as teachings and discipline will, at my passing, be your teacher. Now, monks, I declare to you, all conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on untiringly. These were the Tathagata's last words.
Okay, so this one we pretty much already discussed, but let's talk about this part here where the Buddha is basically giving his last words. His very last words are the first teaching that you need in order to get onto the path to enlightenment. When he says all conditioned things are of a nature to decay, that's him teaching impermanence. His very last words were an actual teaching. So he taught from the time that he got to enlightenment until his very last breath, because a Buddha would be wise enough to know that their last words are going to be very impactful and well studied across the world. So he ensured that his very last words were the very first teaching that somebody would need to be able to get to enlightenment. And then this last part where he says strive on untiringly, this is essentially don't be complacent, right? So here's your first teaching, is that all this impermanence in the world, and don't be complacent, right? Continue to work towards your enlightenment. That's what he's teaching you here. Any questions on this one? Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next one. There's a lot of details here. I've got a lot of details here about death and the Buddha's death. You can read this. I've even got a essay in here from a doctor who is explaining exactly how the Buddha died based on the discourses and his knowledge as a doctor. So this is really good reading. If you guys haven't read this, it really helps you to understand a lot about death and the Buddha's death himself. So let me get all the way down here to the next chapter. Sorry, there's just a lot here. Chapter 98. And Marcy's volunteering to read that. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, teacher. 4 places which should arouse confidence in confidence in the dedicated. Venerable Sir, formerly monks who had spent the rains in various places used to come to see the Tathagata, and we used to welcome them so that such well-trained monks might see you and pay their respects. But with the perfectly enlightened one's passing, we shall no longer have a chance to do this. Ananda, there are 4 places, the sight of which should arouse confidence in the dedicated. Which are they? Here, the Tathagata was born is the first. Here, the Tathagata attained supreme enlightenment is the second. Here, the Tathagata set in motion the wheel of the teachings, dharma wheel, is the third. Here, the Tathagata attained final enlightenment, final nibbana, death of the physical body for an enlightened being, without remainder, is the fourth. And Ananda, the dedicated male and female ordained practitioners, male and female household practitioners will visit those places, and any who dies will make the pilgrimage to these shrines with the devout, committed heart will, and at the breakup of the body after death, be reborn in the heavenly world.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here his students are saying, hey, now that you're about to die, what are we going to do when all these people are coming to visit you? Because if you can imagine, by the time a Buddha gets close to death, there would just be all these people that are enlightened and all these people that are close to enlightenment wanting to come see the Buddha and interested to come see the Buddha. And people are like, hey, what are we going to do when all these people are coming to visit you? And the Buddha says, oh, there's these 4 places that they can actually visit. The first one is where he was actually born. That's the first one. The second one is where it's considered that he actually attained enlightenment. And that's the tree that we all know about in Northeast India. That he actually attained enlightenment over a 6-year period, but it's that tree that's designated as the location where he attained enlightenment. The third is the place of his very first discourse, where he delivered his first discourse and taught the very first teaching of the Four Noble Truths. That's the third place that would arise this dedication and motivation in the mind. And then the fourth place is the location that the body actually ended up expiring, in the separation of the body and the mind, or where he attained final enlightenment. And the Buddha is saying these are the 4 places that you can actually visit. These places are all still marked and available today, as well as a lot of other places. The Buddha was born in what we refer to as Nepal, and all these other sites, these other 3 are in Northeast India. And there's other sites too, not just these 4, but there's plenty of other sites to visit. In fact, I was talking with Vibhav recently when we were down in Mexico, and he was suggesting that maybe we should all take a trip and go to these places and do like a 10 or 12 day retreat. You know, we could take like a bus tour, a train tour. We could go around to all these different places and do like a retreat where we're meditating and you guys are learning, and I can be teaching you along the way of these different sites, because there's more than just these sites. There's plenty of others as well. And I actually organized a tour at one point, but we never ended up doing it. So Vibhav was thinking, and we were talking, that maybe like December 2025 might be a good time. If there's people who are interested in that, you guys can send me a message, and then that way I'll kind of revitalize that, because all I need to do is contact the tour providers and then kind of update the pricing and put that on our website. And we can all kind of plan to do that, or not all of us, of course, but those who are interested in going. So that's something that you guys can think about and let me know by a message or something like that if you'd be interested to do that. So the Buddha is saying that these are the 4 sites that you could visit, and you would be able to experience this improved dedication in the mind by visiting these places. He does say down here that if someone were to die on their journey or pilgrimage, that they would essentially go to the heavenly world. That's not the ultimate goal of the teachings of the Buddha, but he does say that, and I don't suspect that any of us will die on our way to this pilgrimage, but that's what he's saying. And ultimately, the goal would be to get to enlightenment in this life, not to be reborn in the heavenly world. So let me know if you guys have any questions here on this particular chapter. It looks like Samantha has her hand up. If you'd like to go ahead, ma'am.
My question was about the last paragraph that you just mentioned, dying on one of the pilgrimages. Just wondering how that would, I don't want to say give you an advantage, but why would it be that you would be potentially reborn in the heavenly world? Is it that you were so committed and so far along in your journey that's where you were headed anyway? It seems like we should all be making that journey. But then, as you said, we're not likely to die on it. I'm just wondering what the advantage is.
Yeah, this is something that the Buddha spoke, and this is what he shared. I have no way of independently verifying this because, I haven't died and I didn't die on that particular journey. But this is what he's sharing, and this is what he's saying. I think what you're concluding seems very reasonable to me, that somebody's already, developed to a certain degree on this trip. But the ultimate goal isn't to be reborn in heaven, and being there doesn't guarantee one anything other than a very long life and lots of pleasure. And beyond that, someone still needs to get to enlightenment, and they can very easily become complacent and reborn down into the lower realms or back into the human realm. So ultimately, the goal would be to get to enlightenment. And we don't have any way of confirming this unless there's somebody alive today who has been able to verify their past lives and this actually happened to them. That would be the only way to actually verify it. Okay, looks like Vibhav, you have a question?
No, I'm just volunteering to read the next chapter.
Oh, okay. Let me see if there's any questions anywhere else. All right, I don't see any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter, chapter 99.
3 places that should be remembered. Once, there are these 3 places that the head anointed Katiya king would remember all his life. What 3? 1. The first is the place where he was born. 2. The second is the place where he was head anointed a Katiya king. 3. And the third is the place where, having triumphed in battle, he emerged victorious and settled at the head of the battlefield. These are the 3 places that the head anointed Katiya king should remember all his life.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So none of us are head anointed Katiya kings, but there's a teaching here that I think that you can use to your benefit if you glean the detail that I'm sharing with you here. What he's saying, the first line, he's saying, of course, that it's wise to remember where you're born. That's always helpful because wherever you were born and wherever you grew up, those individuals helped you to sustain your life. And should you ever get to enlightenment, the Buddha suggests that if you decide you're going to be a teacher, that it would be wise to go back to that place and share some teachings about how to get to enlightenment. That if you went somewhere else, you attained enlightenment in that other location, and now the place where you essentially grew up, it would be wise to go back there and share some teachings if you're going to be a teacher. Then he says, okay, the second place is where he was essentially anointed as this king. It would be wise to remember that. The way that I would suggest that you use something like this is that if there's any kind of major milestones in your life that you've accomplished, like maybe you had a particular success at like a particular college or university, or maybe a certain company that you've had particular success at, it's wise to remember these kinds of things because those are the individuals that helped you to achieve that success. Even though we tend to grab onto success as if it's something that we did ourselves, any kind of success that you've experienced, there's been many people involved in that, and it would be wise to remember these kinds of things. And then that's the same thing with the third one here, is what I suggest you do is that you remember the people that have helped you to get any kind of success in your life, no matter what it is, no matter how big or how small, and then you show your appreciation and gratitude to those individuals, because then you will be prepared to, of course, have less and less ego. You'll be showing respect. You'll be having generosity. This is going to promote wholesome qualities in your mind. And then also those individuals who have helped you in the past, seeing that you're very appreciative and very respectful, they're going to be more than willing to help you in the future too. You should never practice generosity with an expectation that someone's going to do something for you. Instead, what I'm teaching you to do is to just have appreciation and gratitude for the people that have supported you in life. But just know that in doing so, you will see that those people will be willing to help you in the future, most likely as well. And that's how you can use a teaching like this to your benefit, that rather than you being a head anointed Katiya king, you can see like, yeah, it should be something that I do, which is show appreciation to the people around me who are helping me be successful. This can be neighbors, it could be a boss or coworkers, it could be teachers or people like this. Anybody around you, you can show your appreciation and gratitude in various ways. So this is how I suggest you use a discourse like this, because the Buddha is essentially teaching the natural laws here of cause and effect. And what I just shared with you is a way to make some wise decisions that are going to have a really wholesome effect for you. Any questions on this chapter? Okay, it looks like Marcy has a question, or maybe you're volunteering to read.
I do have a question, teacher, and I will be willing to read next if no one else would like to. Teacher, how would you show appreciation to a being that is no longer here in the physical human realm? I've had a couple of clients and a teacher that has passed that I have great appreciation for, because they helped me in this journey, along the way. So how would you do that for someone that's no longer here?
So the Buddha teaches that when our parents die, it would be wise for us to practice generosity and give out gifts in order to honor them. And we give out gifts in their name. So like, purchasing things and handing those out or making donations on their behalf. This is what he suggests with our parents. And what this does by you practicing generosity in your parents' name is it helps you to train your mind to let go and not hold on and have attachment to your parents, but it also helps to build their good name and their reputation. And I would suggest that we could do something similar to that for examples that you talked about, like teachers or past clients that have been impactful in your life. You could practice a bit of generosity in that person's name as a way to honor and respect them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's go to the next chapter. This is the last one here, chapter 100 for the last one for today. And Marcy, did you say you'd like to read that one?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Birth is the origin of discontentedness, the union of these three things. Monks. The conception of an embryo in the womb takes place through the union of three things. Here, there's a union of the mother and father, but it is not the mother season, and the consciousness/mind, God, Haba, to be reborn, is not present. In this case, there is no conception of an embryo in the womb. Here, there is a union of a mother and a father, and it is the mother's season, but the consciousness mind, Gandhava, to be reborn, is not present. In this case, too, there is no conception of embryo in the womb. But when there is union of the mother and father, and it is the mother's season, and the consciousness mind, Gandhava, to be reborn, is present, through the union of these three things, the conception of the embryo in the womb takes place. The mother then carries the embryo in her womb for 9 or 10 months with much anxiety as a heavy burden. Then, at the end of the 9 or 10 months, the mother gives birth with much anxiety as a heavy burden. Then, when the child is born, she nourishes it with her own blood, For the mother's breast milk is called blood in the noble one's discipline. When he grows up and he senses base when he grows up and his sense bases mature, the child plays at such games as toy plows, tip cap, somersaults, toy windmills, toy measures, toy carts, and toy bow and arrow. When he grows up and his sense bases mature still further, the youth enjoys himself provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure, with forms recognizable by the eye, sound recognizable by the ear, odors recognizable by the nose, flavor recognized by the tongue, physical objects recognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire and provocative of craving. On seeing a form with the eye, he craves after it if it is pleasing. He dislikes it if it is unpleasing. He resides with mindfulness of the body, unestablished, with a limited mind, and he does not understand as it actually is the liberation of mind and the liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. Engaged as he is favoring and opposing whatever feelings he feels, whether pleasant or painful, neither painful nor pleasant, he delights in that feeling, welcomes it, and remains holding to it. As he does so, excitement arises in him. Now, excitement in feelings is clinging. With his clinging as condition, excitement comes to be. With existence as condition, birth, with birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. On hearing a sound with an ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a physical object with the body, on recognizing a mental object with the mind, he craves after it if it is pleasing. He dislikes it if it is unpleasing. He resides with mindfulness of the body unestablished, with a limited mind, and he does not understand as it actually is the liberation of mind, the liberation by wisdom, wherein those evil, unwholesome states are eliminated without remainder. Engaged as he is favoring and opposing, wherever feelings he feels, whether pleasant or painful, nor neither painful nor pleasant, he delights in that feeling, welcomes it, remains holding to it. As he does so, excitement arises in him. Now, excitement in feelings is clinging. With his clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness.
Okay.
Thank you, Teacher Dave.
Yeah, thank you, Marcy. So what the Buddha does here is he takes you through the whole life cycle of a being from conception all the way to explaining why we actually experience discontentedness, with dependent origination in the 6 sense bases in there as well. So I think you guys followed this pretty well. I don't know, because I'm not quite sure, how you guys are thinking about this, but this is very self-explanatory in my opinion, but I understand what the Buddha is sharing here. If there's questions you guys have, let me know. What he's essentially talking about here at the beginning is that there needs to be 3 things in order for a being to come into existence. There needs to be the mother in season, which is essentially the egg being released out of the ovaries. That's what we know now, which wasn't known back then. And the father needs to contribute the sperm. And then there needs to be a consciousness. And when these 3 things come together, then we actually have a living being. That this being now has been formed and there's an embryo, right? And then it's the 5 aggregates that determines that this is a living being, is that we have form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. That's what we need in order to have a living being. And if you look at this, modern science tells us that the 6 sense bases are essentially starting to form as early as 2 weeks in the womb, and then kind of averaging around 4 weeks and maybe as late as 6 weeks. So at that point we essentially have a living being. And now with this being born into the world, the Buddha talks about how an individual develops more and more craving, more and more clinging through sensual desire. And because the mind welcomes in this excitement and the mind clings to it, then the mind is having this agreeable contact and this disagreeable contact. And because of this favoring and opposing, now you're experiencing this discontentedness. Because of these pleasant feelings that the mind clings to, like excitement, now this cycle just continues on and on and on and on and on. So this is a description of the life cycle from conception all the way to discontentedness outside the womb. But a being is experiencing discontentedness even when they first come out of the womb. That's why we cry when we come out of the womb, because we're craving and we're clinging. And now when we get pushed out into the world, we experience that first real big bit of impermanence and we don't like it. And that's why we start crying. So this is helping you to be able to see this in different terms instead of just the clear dependent origination. He's talking about it in terms of kind of the life cycle of a being from conception to discontentedness. Marcy, you have a question? Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, teacher David. More not. I guess it could be towards the bottom of the scripture here, where it says, "Now excitement is feeling is clinging." And today, this was something that excitement was something that I am training the mind with and really trying to dig deep in, because I find that this is what's holding the mind back. It's so, how would I explain this? That of all the days that could come about that I would be searching for a teaching or searching for some understanding, that this would be one of the teachings that is addressed today. And I just, I'm just feeling a little more connected with the teachings, and I'm very grateful for this class today.
Yeah, that's great. So this is why I recommend people to read 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, because if you trickle the teachings in like that, it's only a matter of time before, 3 or 4 days ago you were thinking about something and now you run across the teachings that's applicable exactly to what it is that you were thinking about. Or you're reading certain teachings that 3 or 4 or 5 days from now, you're going to run across that situation and you actually have the wisdom to deal with it because you've been trickling these teachings into the mind. And this is one of the beauties about the teachings of the Buddha, is having the right teaching at the right time. And if you're gradually making your way through the book series like this, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day, reading the words of the Buddha and the words that I share, you're going to gradually build up your wisdom more and more and more. And since you've mentioned it, let me just hone in on this excitement, because sometimes people really have a lot of issues with this, that this conditional pleasant feelings of happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria, these are the things that we chase after with our craving and our clinging. We chase and chase and chase in the unenlightened state. And now learning on the path to enlightenment that one is letting go and eliminating the causes and conditions that is producing that. People oftentimes struggle with that. Not that you've mentioned this, Marcy, but sometimes people oftentimes struggle with that. And it doesn't seem very intuitive, because that's what we're so used to, is chasing after things, getting our excitement, but we don't see the painful feelings waiting on the other side. So what the mind needs to do in order to get to enlightenment is it needs to learn how to enjoy something and have nothing but fun and enjoyment without these conditional experiences, that the mind can only be happy if it gets this particular thing. That's the conditional experience. But if one can experience enjoyment and fun with whatever you're doing, and then when that's over, if there's no clinging, you can move over to the next thing and have fun with that too and enjoy that. And then when that's done, you can let that go, that because you never grabbed onto it to begin with, but you can move on from that and move over here to this third thing, and now you can enjoy that and have fun with that too. And that's what the unenlightened mind doesn't know how to do. The unenlightened mind only knows how to have excitement and fun based on some condition. So as you guys are journeying towards enlightenment and you're eliminating your craving and your clinging, and your mind is being restrained and you're experiencing less and less of these conditioned pleasant feelings, you can feel a little bit mundane for a little bit. Sometimes the mind goes through that, but you can brighten that up and get to the point where you can learn how to enjoy and have fun, but there's no conditioned feelings in the mind, that the mind is just always having fun no matter what you're doing. If you're walking down the street, if you're driving in your car, if you're stuck in traffic, if you're standing in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles, no matter what you're doing, you can just have a cheerful disposition in the mind, and the mind is gladdened and brightened. That's what you would ultimately like to get to. So if at any point you guys see with your mindfulness that your mind is not cheerful and bright and it's not glad, that's where you apply right effort to brighten up the mind. That's where you see that condition of the mind that it feels a little bit dull. You'd like to brighten it up and bring it to the middle. But you need to be sure you don't overshoot that and take it into that conditioned excitement. And this will help you more and more to stay in that middle, so that if ever you see the mind is kind of dull, you brighten it up and bring it to the middle. But if you see it's overactive and excited, you bring it down to the middle where there's more calmness and composure. And now more and more the mind can stay right there in the middle, and you can experience this for a permanent mental state, that the mind is enlightened. And more that you keep your mind in the middle, the more it will stay there. So learning how to have fun and enjoy something without conditioned pleasant feelings is something that the mind needs to learn how to do, and that takes a certain amount of time. And of course it involves eliminating craving and clinging as well. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere else. So what I'm going to do here is just end by thanking all of you guys for reading. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your dedication and interest to learn. If you've been learning before class and after class, you're reading these books, this is outstanding. This is the way to show respect and gratitude to the Buddha for his teachings. He spent 45 years sharing these teachings, and they've been around for 2,500 years, and here you are being able to learn them exactly the way that you can in order to be able to understand them and then be able to progress closer and closer to enlightenment. So thank you for your dedication and diligence, because it's helping you, it's helping all those close to you, and it's helping all of humanity. Next week, we're going to move into the next 10 chapters. We're going to be in chapter 101 to 110. So if you guys would like to read those before or after class, you're more than welcome to do that. And then tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be in the second class of the very beginning of the group learning program. I just restarted it last Sunday, and now tomorrow we're going to be studying the Four Noble Truths and right intention. So we're going to be studying right view and right intention, that first wisdom section of the Eightfold Path. So if there's anybody who would like to attend that, either you or your friends or family, you're welcome to attend through the live stream that I'm going to do from the temple at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. And 9 p.m. I'm going to do it from here at home. And then on Wednesday, we have our second part of our 4-part series of breathing mindfulness meditation. So you guys are always welcome to attend any of these classes. Thank you once again for all your interest and help to be able to read and share these teachings. As you have questions, feel free to reach out. I'm here to help you. So whatever you choose to do today, have a very wonderful and lovely time. Perhaps we'll see you next time. Take care. Sawadee-ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.